The recording disappeared at the 30th second. Not at the end of a blowout, not in the moment when someone slams a door, but exactly when the room goes quiet. The kind of quiet after which a person either tells the truth or postpones it for another month. I didn't find out right away. I found out later, when I opened the timeline for the first time and saw it. Before, there's footage. After, there's footage. And in the middle, nothing. As if someone neatly cut 1 minute out of our life and left us only the consequences. If it had happened once, I would have blamed the tech. But that evening, for the first time, I had the feeling I wasn't dealing with a device, but with a rule. And now, to the beginning. Because in an investigation, what matters isn't emotion, but sequence. We didn't come to a camera out of jealousy. Jealousy feeds on guesses. We were drowning in things that were supposed to be simple. Who said what? Who remembers what? Who did what? At some point it became clear we weren't arguing about feelings. We were arguing about facts. At first it looked domestic. She could go back to the door and check the lock, even though she'd heard the click herself. She could lose her keys and find them in plain sight. She could ask the same thing twice, and then get offended that I was acting like she was not all there. I pretended it didn't get to me. I joked. I closed the topic. I wanted to be a normal husband, not a man hunting for symptoms. Then the gaps started of a different kind. Not, where are the keys, but what happened between the beginning and the end. She remembered the start of a conversation, and after that, either something else or nothing. And there was no play acting in her voice. There was certainty, the kind of certainty with which people defend, not a lie, but their reality. That's why I couldn't just tell myself, she's lying. If she were lying, it would have been easier. A lie is motive. Sincerity without совпадение is chaos. The doctor prescribed her a mild sedative. Gently, just to lower the background anxiety. I didn't argue with the doctor, but something clicked inside me. Now every gap had a convenient label. Pills, stress, the nervous system. It all sounded plausible, which meant dangerous. Plausible explanations close an investigation before it even begins. We fought more and more, and we fought the same way. The scene would start calmly. I'd sit across from her, try to speak evenly, without pressure. She'd agree, nod, even try to joke. Then something would break, and we'd find ourselves in the middle of a screaming match, like someone hit fast forward. After that, as always, I tried to reconstruct the chain. Where exactly did it go wrong? I realized I needed a protocol, not because I wanted to control her, but because I wanted to stop a cycle where each of us ends up guilty, simply because we have different versions of the same minute. That's when the idea of a smart home came up, a camera in the living room, a wide shot, no bedrooms and nothing personal. I even said it to myself like a rule, not to watch, but to document, not to spy, but to have a fact. I chose a company that looked reliable. Request, confirmation, a visit scheduled. Everything was clean, polite, no nerves. And that, as I understand now, was part of the problem. When everything is easy, you stop asking the extra questions. The installer arrived on time. Young, calm uvereni, worked fast, mounted the camera, connected power, brought up the feed. Then he opened the app and started setting up access. He didn't talk much, and I even liked that. Fewer words, fewer reasons for mistakes. The camera appeared on my phone as a new icon. Account, permissions, notifications, device status. Everything was explained so there were no questions left. That evening, I did a simple test. Walked around the room, turned on the water, closed the door, said a couple of ordinary phrases, just to see that it was recording. The timeline ran smoothly, the indicator was lit, the status was online. I felt relief. Like we finally had a witness, one who doesn't get tired, doesn't take offense, and doesn't forget the middle. I didn't know yet that a witness can choose when it's better to look away. And that the most important gaps in this story would appear not in the moment of shouting, but in the moment of silence.
My name is Valerie, Val for short, and I'm 32. I understood right away that a camera in an apartment isn't technology, it's a position. You can screw it into the wall in 10 minutes, but it starts working before the indicator even lights up. It works at the level of behavior. You walk past and, without meaning to, check how you look from the outside. You say a sentence and you're already hearing not the meaning, but how it will sound on the recording. I didn't argue when my husband suggested installing a smart home setup. I was tired of arguing, and I was tired of proving that I wasn't pretending to be forgetful. When you're told again and again, you don't remember, again, you have two options: either agree and lose face, or defend yourself and lose trust. I chose defense, because it was the only thing I had left. He called it facts. I heard something else. We need a witness, and I understood the logic. We really had started arguing about reality. One thing matters here. I started taking the sedative earlier, before the camera. It was prescribed by a doctor, to lower the background anxiety and finally sleep. So when my husband Razdrajona talked about the pills, I felt a double hit. On one side, I was already ashamed that I needed help. On the other, any "I don't remember" automatically turned into a convenient explanation, and the argument ended before it even began. My memory gaps didn't start yesterday either. I don't remember the date. I remember the feeling. At first they were short glitches you could chalk up to life. Went back to check the door, asked again, mixed up the day. Then moments appeared of a different kind. Not where are the keys, but what happened between the beginning and the end. A conversation starts, I'm sure I'm holding the thread, and then it's like a strip of film got cut out, and the edges were spliced together. And here's what's strange. I still feel like the first such hole appeared after one meeting. I don't keep the details in my head, and that's exactly what scares me. Not the meeting itself, but the fact that all that's left of it is a shadow without outlines. I tried to explain it simply: fatigue, stress, overload, but the internal marker is there, after. On installation day, I decided to watch more closely. The installer arrived on time, young, calm, confident. The kind of person who knows how to be unnoticeable and still run the process so smoothly that you're grateful. And in the first seconds, I got a prick of familiarity. Not his face, not his voice, something overall, like I'd already seen that way of carrying himself, that calm tempo, those short movements. I tried to remember where from. Emptiness rose up in my head and I automatically did what I do now far too often. I closed the question, told myself I imagined it, that my anxiety was latching onto random details, that I was just searching for reasons because I was scared. He set up the app on my husband's phone, then on mine. I saw words on the screen like access, permissions, notifications, but I didn't look closely. In that moment, I wanted only one thing: for this to help. And that was my first mistake. When you feel bad, you hand control to the person who promises relief. By evening, the camera was already hanging in the corner of the living room. My husband repeated the rule: a wide shot, no personal zones. I accepted it. Not because it felt comfortable, because I needed proof that I wasn't making things up. But the camera didn't bring calm, it brought a new geography. A viewing angle appeared in the room, and that meant blind spots too. I automatically mapped it out. What could be seen from the couch? What could be seen near the table, where the shadow started? Not because I wanted to hide something. Because I was trying to understand, if this really is a witness, then what exactly will it be a witness to? And I also noticed that we'd become more careful, not because we'd become kinder, but because there was a recording we were both afraid of. He's afraid he'll look cruel. I'm afraid I'll look ridiculous. And when people are afraid of a recording, they start behaving as if they're already guilty. I caught myself choosing words so I would sound right. Not honest, right. It's a thin difference, but it kills what's alive. In the very first serious attempt to talk, I did something I hadn't done before. I looked at the indicator, not at my husband, at the indicator. I needed to know that this time there would be a trace left. Because if the witness disappears at the key moment, it's not about memory anymore. It's about power over what gets counted as truth. I didn't expect the camera to give us the truth. I expected something else. That it would take at least one kind of fight away from us. The ones where we're not arguing about feelings, but about what even happened. That evening I put my phone down nearby in advance. Not because I wanted to spy, but because I wanted to document. If the conversation derailed again, would there be at least some neutral trace left? Everything looked ordinary. The kitchen, the light above the table, 2 mugs. My husband sat down across from me like he was rehearsing calm. I tried to keep my face too, but inside I switched into observation mode. I wasn't watching him, I was watching the structure of the moment. First, silence. Then his even tone. Then the pause where the main question usually enters. And it was in that pause that, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the indicator in the living room go dark. Not blink. Go dark. I stood up and did what I'd long wanted to do instead of arguing. I checked the fact. I opened the app. The status was cold and simple, device offline. Below it was the reason, too universal to be an explanation, server error. I didn't steer the conversation toward the camera. If I'd said it out loud, we would have immediately started arguing about the tech, not about why we installed it in the first place. I needed something else to mark the point. I memorized 3 parameters. The disconnect happened before the yelling, didn't last long, and looked the same, like a neat window. A minute later the camera came back online, the indicator lit up, and the system pretended nothing had happened. And that mattered more than any words on the screen. A short blackout that cuts out precisely the middle. If the camera dropped for 10 minutes, I would have believed in a malfunction. Big failures are more honest. They break everything indiscriminately. But a small failure that skips only one layer of a scene looks like a choice. The next day I stopped relying on memory and started relying on documentation. I took a notebook and decided to write down not when, but under what conditions. I didn't need a calendar. I needed a scheme. Condition A, we're silent. The camera is online. Condition B. I'm alone, walking around the apartment, turning on the water, opening cabinets. The camera is online. Condition C. Neutral conversation. The camera is online. Condition D. My husband sits down across from me, and we start talking like adults. The camera is offline. So I wouldn't leave myself a loophole for self-deception. I added a second layer of documentation, screenshots. Every time the status changed, I took a screenshot with the time visible in the phone's shade. I didn't write, "We fought." I wrote, 1942, offline. 1943, online. It sounds dry, but dryness is the only thing that holds your mind together when reality starts to wobble. I tested the device with simple checks, not out of some detective game, but to cut off the obvious causes. I deliberately walked past the camera, said ordinary phrases out loud, opened and closed the door, slammed a cabinet door, turned on the water, left the living room light on. The camera held. I even checked the internet at moments when the camera was working. I opened pages on my phone, played a video, watched to see whether the connection was crumbling. Everything was stable. And in the evening my husband would come home, sit down across from me, and at the moment the conversation shifted from household routine into meaning, the status would change again. I kept safe versions for myself, coincidence, server issues, connectivity, but the versions broke on one detail. The camera didn't choose the time of day. It chose the type of moment. When I finally said it out loud, not as an accusation, but as a formulation, I felt lighter. Not because the problem disappeared, but because the main humiliation of the last few months disappeared. The feeling that it was all only in my head. I showed my husband the notebook and the screenshots, not with, "Look, I'm right," but like evidence, repeatability, the same window, the same reason. He looked, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't argue, he started counting. We didn't agree on feelings. But we agreed on a fact: the disconnect repeats and it looks too much like an action to remain just background noise. Then my husband said he'd write to support. I agreed, because the next step in any case is one. If you have a pattern, you check who else can see it, and who has the right to call it an error. Once we had a pattern, arguing became pointless. A pattern doesn't argue. It either exists or it doesn't. And then we did what people do when the household explanations run out. We took the problem outside the apartment. My husband wrote to support that same evening. He described it dryly: short offline windows, recovery afterward, repetition, alignment with a certain type of conversation. He attached a few timestamps and a couple of status screenshots. He didn't ask them to deal with his wife, he asked them to deal with the device. The reply came quickly. I expected a template, but the message felt human: polite apologies, sympathy, a promise to help. And that was the trap. Sympathy calms you down, but it doesn't explain. And we needed an explanation. Then the standard procedure started. They asked for the device model, app version, connection type, and the times of the last dropouts. My husband collected everything point by point. Then they asked for logs, technical data. He found the right section in the app and exported a report. I watched it the way you watch an interrogation, where the questions aren't asked of people, but of a system. And at some point, what bothered me wasn't support itself, but the mechanism. To be checked, we had to hand the system even more information about ourselves. I pushed that thought away and kept documenting what they asked for, what we gave, what they replied, and at what time. Support wrote again. They could see instability on the server side, had escalated it to engineers, and suggested temporary steps: restart, reconnect to the network, update the app. My husband did everything on the list: restarted the camera, reconnected it to Wi-Fi, updated the app, maxed out notifications. In a separate message, support asked for a couple more things: check the power adapter, make sure the camera isn't plugged in through a smart plug with a timer, and for the duration of troubleshooting, turn off battery saver mode on the phone. It was logical, and still I couldn't shake the thought. They were treating not the symptom but our comfort. The next day the camera worked perfectly. Stable, not a single drop. If the story had ended there, we probably would have both apologized to each other and decided the problem was nerves and coincidences. And I almost wanted it to be that simple. But in the evening, when the conversation turned serious again, the camera went offline again, another short window. In the app, the same reason appeared again: server. And again, exactly the piece disappeared that turns a conversation either into reconciliation or into proof. My husband wrote to support again. The reply came quickly again, in the same style: soft, correct, sympathetic, as if they weren't servicing us, but soothing us. This time they asked for more specifics. Not tell us what's happening, but give the exact time. Send more screenshots. Check whether the IP address changes. If you can, connect the camera to a different network for an hour. The list was reasonable, but it still didn't include the main thing: why the failure looked like a neat window. And then support suggested the next step: remote diagnostics. Formally, it sounded right. If the problem was on the server side, they needed a deeper look, and some checks can't be done without remote access. For that, they asked us to confirm the account and grant temporary permission for a diagnostics session. On the outside, it looked like an ordinary checkbox in the app. Inside, it sounded different. We're letting a third party into a system that's already behaving strangely. I suggested to my husband we do something simple first. Change the password, sign out of all devices, turn on login verification, not as an accusation, just as insurance. My husband agreed halfway. He changed the password, but postponed the sign out everywhere idea. He was afraid we'd lose access to the camera and have to start over. Support sent instructions, open settings, approve the request, wait for the check to finish. They even asked us to tell them when we'd be home and the camera would be online, so the session would run normally. We set a time. I wrote the start and end of the session in my notebook and decided to watch in the simplest way possible, what the indicator does, how the status changes, whether there's a reboot. At the scheduled moment, the camera blinked briefly, as if it restarted, and went back online. A few minutes later, a message came in saying the check was complete. I looked at my husband and realized we were both hoping for the same thing, that this was finally a technical story. But hope is a bad argument. In that minute, I felt it clearly for the first time. This was no longer only about the camera. It was about who can enter our system as easily as we can, and what exactly they can change while we keep believing the word server. After the remote diagnostics, the house really did feel lighter, but too neatly so. Support wrote that they'd checked everything, adjusted things on the server side, and that it should work stably now. 3 lines that were supposed to hand normal life back to us. My husband felt better almost immediately. And I understood him. When you're exhausted by suspicion, any official wording sounds like a verdict in favor of peace. I opened my notebook and added a new marker, period after diagnostics, because if you have a pattern, you don't celebrate, you compare. For the first 24 hours, the camera worked perfectly, no dropouts. I noted it separately, the way I'd note silence in a noise case. And that was dangerous, because perfect device behavior makes the person guilty again. You, your emotions, your anxiety. I almost caught myself in the old thought, maybe I'm the one making it complicated. And then the offline window came back. Same size. Same effect. The middle disappears. Not the whole evening, not the whole conversation, the middle. I didn't tell my husband, see? Instead, I did what we'd already learned to do. I set a check. The next evening, I changed the conditions on purpose. I suggested we move the serious conversation to a different time, earlier than usual. If the cause really was server overload or peak hours, the camera should have behaved differently. If the cause was the type of moment, it would repeat. It repeated. And that finished off the random overload theory for good. My husband wrote to support again. The answer came fast, as always. The tone was the same, soft, careful. We understand your concern. I asked him to show me the entire thread, not to nitpick, but to compare the wording. In an investigation, style is a fingerprint. I saw repetitions, the same reply structure, the same soothing phrases, the same promise to escalate to engineering, nothing criminal by itself. But in one message there was a detail that snagged. Support clarified a nuance we hadn't described. Not a name, not an address, not personal information. Just context. As if the person on the other side didn't simply see the device, but knew what exactly was happening in our home during those dropouts. On paper, it looked harmless. But something clicked inside me. That wasn't technical interest, that was interest in the scene. I remembered the installer, or rather not his face but the feeling, his calm tempo, his short movements, and how I couldn't remember then where I knew that manner from. I decided not to force the memory. I decided to check access. I opened the account settings and found the section that shows active devices and sessions. There were a few entries I expected to see: my phone, my husband's phone, and one more entry: anonymous, technical, no name. Something like service diagnostics session. Session, in this sense, is a technical term for a period when a connection is active. It could have been normal, but what snagged me was that it didn't disappear right after the check. I showed it to my husband. He said it was probably temporary and would go away on its own soon. I didn't argue. I wrote it down. That same night, I did a practical check of the space, no mysticism. I walked through the apartment and re-evaluated the camera as an object, the angle of view, the points where it sees the table, where it sees the entry, where the shadow begins. And one thing hit me unpleasantly: a blind spot by the exit from the kitchen, exactly where a person can vanish from frame for a second without vanishing from the room. I'm not saying it was set up that way on purpose. I'm saying it's convenient. And in investigations, convenient is a dangerous word. We ended up back in the old trap, only now it looked civilized. Either I'm to blame because I don't remember, or he's to blame because he pressures, or the servers are to blame. And in any version, the truth stays just slightly out of reach, exactly for one short window. I wrote down one more rule: if they soothe you more often than they explain, the goal isn't repair. The goal is to make you stop asking questions. And now the main question for me wasn't, why does the camera go offline? The main question sounded like this: who benefits from us keeping the problem somewhere far away, on the servers, and not here at home?
When Val lost conversations, I held on to the simplest explanation for a long time. She doesn't want to hear it. It's a crude explanation, but a convenient one. It makes you right and saves you from having to be afraid. The problem was that convenient explanations stopped matching the facts. We installed the camera for one reason: to end the war of versions. I wanted that. In the moment, Val said, "You didn't say that." I could open the recording and show it. I did. Not to humiliate her, but to stop the loop. But the loop didn't stop. It got more precise. Val kept insisting that certain words hadn't been said, that I'd made them up, that I was spinning myself up. I kept getting angry because I'd heard those words myself. I'd said them myself. I remembered them literally. And every time we got to the check, the same thing turned out. Right at the moment I said the main thing, the camera went offline. At first I tried to count it as a malfunction, then as coincidence, then as bad internet. But the coincidence repeated too neatly. The camera didn't drop on noise, not on the TV, not on everyday talk. It dropped on my attempt to say the thing that changes our life. And then I had a question that made me feel sick. If the camera disappears in the exact seconds Val later can't remember, then the problem isn't only in the recording. The problem is in the moment itself. I needed to understand two things. First, does Val actually black out, or is she just refusing to admit it? Second, does the camera shut off on its own, or is someone helping it? I started with what I could check without arguing. I stopped having conversations on emotion. I started setting them up like an experiment. I chose the time, I chose the place, I chose the topic, and most importantly, I chose the point where a specific phrase would have to appear, something hard to confuse with anything else. That evening I did something I used to consider humiliating. I turned on the voice recorder on my phone and left it not next to us, but in the next room. Voice recorder is the common English term for a phone dictaphone. I didn't need a secret recording of Val. I needed an independent trace that the conversation was happening at all. We sat down in the kitchen again. I started as calmly as I could. I could see Val tense up, not because of the words, but because she was expecting the drop. And I was waiting too. I wasn't tracking her face. I was tracking the rhythm. silence, my line, her answer, a pause. When I reached the point where the main thing usually gets said, I caught, out of the corner of my eye, the indicator in the living room going dark. Went dark. And in that same second, Val's gaze changed. Not like someone who's angry or arguing, like someone who, for a fraction of a second, detaches from reality. She was sitting across from me, but her presence became formal. The body is here, but the moment isn't. A minute later, everything came back. The camera was online again. Val was looking at me again. And the conversation continued. Only now, it was after the break. And then, like always, she said I hadn't said what I'd said. And for the first time, I understood that we weren't fighting because she was stubborn. We were fighting because she really wasn't in that minute. The next day, I listened to the voice recording. I'm not going to retell the content. There was no sensation in the words. The sensation was in the continuity. The audio ran straight through. No internet drops. No power outage. The conversation didn't break. Only the camera did. And that became the scariest link in our case. Val loses a minute. The camera loses a minute. Val comes back. The camera comes back. Now, I couldn't honestly hold on to the version she's lying. If she were lying, it would be easier. Lies can be treated with boundaries. A memory blackout is treated with something else entirely, and I wasn't ready to say it out loud. I opened the account settings again, and the list of sessions. And for the first time I understood why I hated the word diagnostics. Because after it, a third participant appeared in our story, one who knows how to disappear exactly when Val disappears. And if that isn't coincidence, then it has an operator. And the operator has access. After the voice recorder, my last excuse disappeared. Before, I could tell myself anything, that Val was stubborn, that she was defending herself, that I was the one complicating everything. I could even hold on to bad internet, but the independent audio ran straight through, at the exact moment the camera went offline. That meant reality in the apartment didn't break. Only the witness did. And if a witness breaks at exactly one point, it's not a malfunction anymore. It's a scheme. I did what people do when they finally get truly scared. I stopped arguing and started building a timeline. Timeline is the standard English term for a chronological line of events. I took all our markers, Val's screenshots, my notes, the app notifications, the voice recording file, and laid them out minute by minute. Not sometime in the evening, but specifically, what time the conversation started, what time the camera went offline, what time it came back, how long the window lasted. The picture was unpleasantly clean. The offline windows repeated with almost the same length. They appeared not in chaos, but in one type of moment, the silence before a key phrase. And that's where the link finally locked into place for me, the one that made my skin go cold. Val's blackout and the camera's blackout match, not because it happened that way, but because it's useful. Useful to whom? If I chase the server, I run in circles. If I chase diagnostics, I expand access. But if I chase the beneficiary, the one who gains from it, the whole thing narrows to one goal: remove the evidence at the moment it could stop the conflict. Beneficiary is a standard English equivalent for выгодоприобретатель. Because that's why the camera was installed in the first place, to end the war of versions. If there's no recording at the key moment, the war continues. I looked at Val differently. For the first time in a long while, I saw not an opponent, but a person whose time is being cut into pieces. And the scariest part is that it's done neatly, without external drama. She doesn't collapse, doesn't faint, doesn't look sick. She just returns a minute later, and honestly doesn't understand why I'm so angry. If this were only about memory, the camera wouldn't matter. But the camera matters, because it loses the exact same minute. So in our case, there are two objects, Val and the system. And there's a third, whoever can control the system. I opened the support thread again and read it as evidence, not as help. There was too much soothing and too little explaining. Too even a tone. Too fast a response. Like the job wasn't to fix it, but to keep us in the mode of, it's just the server. I understood that the next mistake would be the old one. Ask support again, wait again, agree to another check. We'd already done that, and it didn't make the windows disappear. It led to the appearance of a service session. So the next step had to be outside their channel. I made 3 decisions. First, no more serious talks without independent control, not for leverage but for my own sanity. If Val drops out again, I have to know it happened, and I have to have proof for myself, so I don't turn into a person who screams from helplessness. Second, no new permissions, and no new remote access. Not a single click of yes without understanding exactly what it opens. If support asks for one more access, the answer is no, until they explain what's already enabled. Third, I will get the name of the person who was in our home. Because it all started with the installer's visit. He chose the spot, he saw the apartment. He set up the account. He could explain what's enabled by default and what was added manually. And if there's a person in this story who knows our system better than we do, it's him. I pulled up the documents and the order number again. I wrote a short request to the company. The installer's full name, the visit time, the list of work performed, any notes on settings and remote diagnostics. Not please look into it, but provide the information. And in parallel, I decided something else, the most unpleasant thing for my temperament. I stopped treating Val as the source of the problem. As long as I believed she was lying, I was convenient. I could be led in circles. Cut the camera for a moment, and I'd start pushing her again. But if I stop pushing, the scheme breaks. I didn't know who was behind it. I didn't know what they wanted. I wasn't even sure they existed. But I already saw the main thing. Someone is doing everything they can to make it impossible, in our apartment, to prove the truth in the most important minute. And if the truth is inaccessible exactly where it's supposed to save you, then it's not a glitch. It's interference. And now my task wasn't to guess a motive. My task was to find the hand.
I don't like emotional tickets. My name is Alex. I'm 29. When people write to support like, "This is a nightmare, and we can't take it anymore," it doesn't help them or the system. The system doesn't understand hysteria, it understands events, statuses, intervals. This ticket was different. Few words, a lot of structure, short offline windows, repetition, overlap with a certain type of conversation. No demands, no threats, just a description of the thing that usually kills any comfortable version. I opened the case and first looked at the device. Model, firmware, event history, connection graph. Nothing exotic. Standard camera, standard apartment, standard network. And a standard human mistake. They think offline always means a connectivity problem. Most of the time, yes. But statuses have one more property. They can be controlled like any interface. You don't have to break the device. It's enough to control what it reports upward. I ran diagnostics. From the outside, it looks like a remote check. On the inside, it's a sequence of procedures that should lead to one thing: restore stability and close the support ticket. Support ticket is the common term for ticket in this context. They were waiting for me to say, "It's the server." And honestly, that's the most convenient word in stories like this. It soothes and explains nothing. It turns a pattern into an accident. I prefer control. In cases like this, what matters isn't so much fixing as keeping the system in a predictable mode. Predictability is what people call stability, even if they don't understand what exactly is stable. I left a service session active. In technical English, A session is a period when a connection is active and communication can take place. Formally, it's justified. The ticket isn't closed, observation is required, repeatability has to be checked. It doesn't sound illegal, it sounds like work. In practice, a session is a key. A key shouldn't disappear, while you might still need the door. I looked at the logs and saw what they considered the main thing: short windows. Inside the system, windows look like math: length, frequency, trigger condition. In human life, those windows look like a minute that evaporated, leaving only consequences. I don't know what exactly they say to each other in those moments. And I don't need to. The content of the conversations doesn't matter if the goal is to control what remains provable. I set up an observation mode. Watch this specific device, catch the repeat, log the time. After that, the same thing usually happens. First, relief. Then, the window comes back. Then, another message asking why. After diagnostics, it got better, and then it got worse again. I read messages like that and mark details. Not because their relationship interests me, because details show which one of them will start investigating. The dangerous element is documentation. Screenshots, minutes, repeatability. When people stop arguing and start counting, they become inconvenient. I saw them change the password. I saw them turn on sign-in verification. I saw them look for active sessions. That's a normal reaction, but a normal reaction doesn't mean an effective one. As long as I have a service session, their actions look like trying to tidy a desk while the key is in someone else's pocket. I could wipe traces. I could close the session and vanish to reduce risk. But vanishing leaves traces too. Sudden moves are more noticeable. So I did what I always do when I need to wait something out. I left the minimum. Minimum presence, minimum noise, minimum changes. At minimum / the bare minimum is a common English equivalent for CUC minimum. People get tired quickly. And in moments like that, they come back for help again. They click the checkboxes again. They expand access again, because it feels like they're getting closer to a solution. On installation day, when I first ended up in their home, I remembered one thing that had nothing to do with tech: order. Not staged for guests, real order, the kind you keep not for show, but for air. People like that always have one weakness: they need everything to be right. And that's exactly why it's so hard for them to live in a place where rightness can be turned off by the minute. I closed the case and left it in monitoring status. Not because it's hard for me to solve the problem, but because some problems are more convenient when they repeat.
I'm looking at this story not as a family drama and not as tech. I'm looking at it as a conflict of realities that accidentally gained an external arbiter, the camera, and immediately lost it. Val has a key symptom that in everyday life often gets called forgetfulness, but in form it looks different. It's not distractibility and not "where did I put my keys," but blackouts in the middle of events. Such blackouts can appear against a background of intense stress and lived through events, and in clinical language, dissociative amnesia is described as an inability to recall important autobiographical information, often related to stress or trauma, and this differs from ordinary forgetting. I'm not making a diagnosis from a story. I'm marking the mechanism that destroys the relationship. Val sincerely can't reconstruct a piece of the scene, while still keeping certainty that she remembers how it was. For a partner, that looks like a lie with cold eyes. For the person inside the blackout, it looks like a world where you're being asked to confess to something you didn't witness. And here the second line appears: Max, the husband. His problem isn't cruelty, his problem is survival logic. When you hear your own words, remember them, and the reply you get is, "That didn't happen." The brain chooses one of two explanations. Either you're losing your mind or you're being deceived. Most people choose the second because it's less frightening. He starts getting angry not because he wants power, he's angry because he's losing his footing. And the more footing he loses, the harder he presses Val to get the ground back. That pressure increases her tension, And tension, if there's a tendency toward dissociation, increases the risk of another blackout. It becomes a closed loop. Psychologically, the couple develops an effect that resembles gaslighting in outcome, even if not necessarily in intent. Gaslighting is described as psychological manipulation that makes a person doubt their thoughts, perception, or memory. Here, the manipulation may not be coming from the husband and not from Val, but from the situation. Memory doesn't match fact, and fact isn't being recorded. In this construction, the camera was supposed to be the medicine. Normally, an external memory carrier reduces anxiety. We won't argue, we'll check. That's why the husband's decision to install a camera isn't only about control. It's also an attempt to give himself and Val a shared reality. But when the camera turns off at the exact moment of the key phrase, the medicine becomes an amplifier. Val's psyche gets confirmation of the most dangerous thing. I blacked out again, and even the system can't confirm that I'm not making it up. The husband's psyche gets a different confirmation. In the moment I say the main thing, the proof disappears, so I won't be allowed to be heard. After that, both inevitably begin doing what people do in chaos: increase control. Val starts documenting, keeping a notebook, taking screenshots, because she needs a crutch for memory. The husband starts building timelines and hunting access, because he needs a crutch for trust. This isn't paranoia, it's adaptation. But adaptation has a price. The relationship turns into an investigation. Any pause becomes suspicious, any mistake becomes evidence. And the quietest damage doesn't happen in shouting. It happens when the right to ordinary human inaccuracy disappears. In the end, I would highlight their shared psychological problem, stronger than any fight. They no longer feel there's a place in the home where you can make a mistake and still be safe. When mistakes start requiring proof, people stop being partners and become sides in a process. If the camera worked honestly, the couple would have a chance. They would stop accusing each other and start treating the cause of the blackouts, not the consequences of the conflicts. But with constant windows, truth is inaccessible, and that makes both of them manageable. One pushes, the other closes off. In that state, any external intervention becomes dangerous, because it replaces care with procedure. And that's why the story inevitably moves from family into detective. When a shared reality disappears, people start looking for whoever is turning it off. Now I'm looking at the third participant in the story, Alex, not as a monster, but as a psychological structure. A person like this rarely looks like an obvious threat. More often, he looks like a specialist who knows how to be useful. Show up on time, speak calmly, leave behind a sense of order. His strength isn't emotion, it's the role. The helper role gives perfect cover. You can be trusted with access without being asked extra questions. His core problem isn't love or passion in the human sense. It's a need for access. He doesn't have the skill of tolerating uncertainty. He needs to know where a person is, what they're doing, how they react. So instead of relationship, he chooses management. He doesn't build closeness, he builds infrastructure. Psychologically, this resembles coercive control. It's described as an ongoing pattern of behavior designed to exert power and dominance, often by restricting autonomy, micromanaging daily life, isolation, intimidation, and related tactics. In the modern version, technology gets added to the toolkit: surveillance, tracking, and smart home manipulation, where control is carried out not with words, but with settings. The most important marker is choice of impact. He doesn't create big scenes, he creates short windows. And that isn't accidental. Small interference is harder to prove and easier to name a glitch. For the victim's mind, that can be worse than a big attack. With a big attack, you know you're being attacked. With windows, you start doubting whether the attack exists at all. Then his favorite mechanism switches on: rationalization. He explains the interference to himself as care, professional necessity, diagnostics, stability. He can tell himself he's preventing something worse. that he's keeping the situation under control, that without him they would fall apart. That logic lets him avoid guilt, because he declares himself not a violator but a rescuer. The second part of the mechanism is objectification. For him, Val is not fully a subject with a right to privacy. She's an object that must be kept in the correct mode. And when the real Val leaves that mode, gets tired, gets angry, pulls away, gets scared, he doesn't experience it as another person's natural freedom. He experiences it as a system error that must be corrected. That's where his target choice comes from. Not to persuade the husband, not to prove something to Val with words, but to arrange things so the couple has no proof. As long as there's no proof, the conflict will repeat. As long as the conflict repeats, the spouses stay busy with each other. That's perfect camouflage. As a result, the couple gets a gaslighting-like effect, where a person begins to doubt memory and perception because traces disappear while explanations sound confident. Gaslighting is commonly described as manipulation that leads someone to doubt their perception or memory. What matters here is that gaslighting isn't always direct lines like "you imagined it." Sometimes it's an architecture where you truly have nothing to confirm reality with. And here's what the story kept hidden for a long time. This person wasn't only a specialist, he was the source of the first major crack in Val's memory. He exploited her vulnerability, drugged her, and made sure the event remained for her not as a memory, but as a blank and shame without clear edges. In cases like that, victims often can't assemble a complete picture because the psyche chooses survival over accuracy. After that, control becomes a continuation of the first violation. He already crossed a boundary once, so psychologically, it's easier to cross again. He doesn't experience no as a fact, he experiences no as an obstacle. People like this are dangerous also because they're patient. They don't need to win today, they need the scheme to keep running tomorrow. That's why they love support, tickets, and sessions, legal words for an illegal feeling, the right to someone else's life. And that's why exposure for them isn't only a risk of punishment. It's the collapse of the main support. They lose access, and with it the illusion that they can control someone else's reality. Put very simply, his psychological problem sounds like this. He can't live next to a person he can't control. And when someone can't do that, he turns feeling into a system. And then the camera in the corner of the room stops being a device. It becomes an extension of his psyche,